Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today in this video, I'm going to take you back in time and look at some of the updates I prepared but didn't have time to share with you from May 2019. And then also share with you some of the orchids, why I cut their flower spikes the way I did, and hopefully this update, this delayed update, can still provide value to give you an understanding of what I have done with my orchids and how they're doing. This is a primary hybrid between Tetraspis and Equestris. I've had this one since it was a very little tiny seedling, and now I think it may take another year for it to become a mature size. This one is grown in moss, with no drainage hole at the bottom. It seems to like it pretty well. And just judging by the way that the leaves are growing and also new roots coming out at the time, I knew this orchid was doing fairly well. And the reason I took photos of this one was because it went from a 8-ounce cup to this 12-ounce cup. And I repotted it with moss, the same growing method, and it seems to adapt to this particular method really well. Even with the bigger cup, it seems to do just fine. And here is my Schilleriana after the bloom this year. It was putting out a new leaf and then new roots, but then this one is also really cool in a way that it just grew a lot of roots into the reservoir area. So semi-hydro is the method I'm using for this orchid, and it's doing really well. And this is a rescue orchid. This one, I got it from a colleague, and it bloomed this year, rebloomed under my care in this particular method. Moss, no drainage hole, it seemed to like it, but after the bloom had dropped, I noticed that it immediately focused on its energy in leaf production as well as root production. The last tiny little bud that came out after the bloom had dropped also decided that it's just not gonna make it. So that's okay though. It was growing roots and a new leaf, so I think this orchid is on the right track. Now this is my white mid-sized Phalaenopsis orchid. This one has a keiki on top of a spike, as you can see, and it's water culture. I keep it with in water pretty much the whole time, and the roots that you're seeing, there are two roots that are from the that are keiki roots. That's already long enough to be able to reach, and hopefully it'll continue to grow so that it will get to the bottom of the cup, so that way when I only give this orchid very little amount of water at the bottom of the cup, the keiki can still hydrate itself without having to go through the mother plant. And here we have a keiki of my species Pokra, Phalaenopsis pokra, but this time the update is a little shocking because this keiki has grown so large that it became top heavy. So one day when I woke up, I saw this orchid with a bent flower spike. It was just too top heavy. Nobody hit it because there's no one else in my apartment. So I think it was just because the stick that I provided was too short, and it decided that it was just too top heavy, so it bent the way it did. But I quickly found another wire, another metal wire that's tall enough, so I prop it up again, because I looked at the flower spike, it wasn't completely snapped, it was just bent. So I'm hoping that it will still continue to be able to absorb water. So we'll see if this keiki shows any signs of dehydration, and if it does, then I'll have to detach it. But if not, and if it continues to grow roots and leaves, that means that even though the spike was bent, the tissue inside was not obstructed, so it can still provide energy, it can still provide water, nutrients to the keiki from the mother plant. So I'll keep you posted. And here are the 4 Tolumnias I have. they all bloomed exceptionally well this year, except for one that bloomed for the first time. The blooms were totally underwhelming, but they had, by May 2019, they were all done with their spikes, secondary spikes. So they were all becoming, the spikes were becoming brown, yellow, but they all put their energy toward new growth, which I was really pleased to see. Even with the one with underwhelming flowers, it was growing, putting out new growths. So I know that they're doing pretty well. And because the flower spikes are already brown, so I decided that I need to just make them neat again by cutting their flower spike off. And how I usually do it with Talevnia is basically cut to the very end. But before you do that, make sure you sterilize the scissor you're gonna use, because you don't want to have any potential cross-contamination of virus or just, you know, issues. I like my Talevnias, but I think having 4 is enough. They're really cute, they're not expensive, and if you have Orchid, you have a love for Orchid and don't have any of Talevnia in your collection, I totally recommend that you get a couple just to see if you can do well with them or if they can do well in your environment. And now let's switch gear to my mini Phalaenopsis orchids. I have quite a few. I think I have maybe like around 10 mini Phalaenopsis orchids, and all except one bloomed this year, so they all did really well this year. The one on top especially, I mean, it had so many long roots that eventually I decided that I'm just gonna bend the roots and put them into the space between the clay pot and the transparent outer cup. And it seems to did okay. It seems to do okay just fine. It didn't mind the fact that I totally just damaged their the roots filament. It was continued to be able to, you know, absorb water. And this is the orchid that had that really sensitive buds, and this orchid eventually blasted most of its buds except gave me 3 flowers. And I talked about maybe I want to switch to, you know, it's already in a cup with no drainage hole because it was water culture, and I was talking about just putting moss in to convert it to moss no drainage hole, because the fact that it's water culture means I have to move it around and getting water out, things like that. But I think this year, I mean, right after the bloom, it started to pull out a lot of energy for root production and leaf production. So I think I'm gonna try another year, knowing this orchid can be very sensitive when it's in buds. So I think next time around, I'm just gonna be extra careful. So I think I'm gonna give this orchid another year of water culture just to see if next time I'll have the same problem. And if it is, I can totally, you know, change my growing method for that orchid. And so, yeah, in terms of spike cutting, I always try to cut the spikes, you know, just above the bottom node if I don't need to handle the orchid by its flower spike. But if they are still potted in some kind of original small container, and I put it into a bigger cup that I also that sometimes I need to take it out of that cup, I would leave the flower spike a little longer, maybe like 2 to 3 inches, so that it's easy for me to just pull by this dry spike that I purposely keep. Otherwise, you know, if they're grown in a media, in a clay pot or in hydrocorn, in whatever pebbles or stones you use, and you don't handle the orchid that way, then you should totally cut them back until, you know, pretty much just above the first node. And that's kind of the rule of thumb that I go by. Obviously, you can also, if you want, cut it to the complete, like the end of it, or leave your dry flower spike on. I mean, it's a matter of preference. But overall, I think this year in springtime, I had about 40 different orchids in bloom, including Phalaenopsis and Talevnias. It's like about 40. So I really just waited until one hot summer day and cut all their spikes off, except for one, because I have this big orchid and I just needed to save a lot, some space. And this orchid, I know it's not a sequential bloomer, and the spike was not doing anything. So I basically cut off the spike before the last node, the farthest node on that spike. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!